As the zombies approached, a door opened at the far end of the room. A man peered out, confused by the commotion, then flinched in shock when he saw the intruder. He slammed the door shut immediately. Seeing the man, Javier thought there was at least someone here he could question. The zombies lunged at him. Javier dodged them, slicing through their limbs as he moved toward the door. He reached it and kicked it open, sending the door flying off its hinges and crashing into the man on the other side. Javier stepped inside and walked toward the man as he cowered in fear. The man begged him not to kill him as Javier drew closer. Javier said he had a question to ask. He slammed his foot down on the man's leg, breaking it. He warned him that if he hesitated with any answer, his other leg would suffer the same fate. Then he coldly asked what Cannavaro was planning here. The man shouted immediately, saying he didn't know. He only followed orders. He had been hired as an undertaker. Javier lifted his foot, ready to break the other leg. The man hurriedly said that he embalmed bodies with a special chemical, and that moments ago he had been ordered to watch this place. Javier asked where he acquired the bodies. The man said they took the sick from the refugees. Javier remembered an earlier moment. Cannavaro had been assuring a woman that her husband was being well looked after and would return once he recovered. Javier clenched his teeth, seething. He must have killed them all. Then he realised where the skulls Lloyd had found had come from and why the zombies were stitched together from multiple bodies. Javier asked the man whether he hadn't found it strange that the sick were dying almost immediately after receiving care from Cannavaro. The man stuttered, unsure how to respond. Javier knew it. The man had known everything. He was just as guilty as Cannavaro. He slammed his foot down, breaking the man's other leg. Then he turned and ran out, heading for Lloyd to tell him what he had discovered. He made his way to the room they had been staying in, looking for Lloyd, but it was empty. He grabbed his sword. There was no time to search for him. He would have to deal with Cannavaro himself. He headed for the place where Cannavaro had been sending the sick, Terminal Market. This had to be his base. Javier crashed through a window and drew his sword ready for battle, but the building was empty. He moved quietly down the stairs, wondering where everyone was. It should have been full of people. Then he sensed something. Had the ritual already begun? Above the city, a dark cloud began to form. Javier hunched over as weakness washed through him. His strength was draining from his body. He staggered outside and looked up at the sky. An ominous dark cloud hung above the city, and an ominous wall of dark energy surrounded it. He tried to summon his sword aura, but his mana was gone. All across the city, people began collapsing, their strength being siphoned away. Javier wondered where Lloyd was. He had to be in danger. Elsewhere, Siluria looked out the window of the manor, wondering what was happening. She saw people collapsing outside and rushed down the stairs, heading out. For some reason, the ritual had no effect on her as she made her way toward her people. Just outside the city, a hooded man was performing a ritual to summon the Night of Hell. Suddenly, Lloyd appeared, glaring at the man with his face inches away from his. The man flinched at the sight of Lloyd's mug, wondering who he was as he struggled to maintain his concentration. Lloyd said he had seen around 30 people nearby doing the same thing and asked whether they were performing some kind of rain dance. The man remained silent, focusing on the ritual. Lloyd glared at him and told him he was talking to him and to stop ignoring him. For a moment, the hooded man wondered whether that face was even human. He almost thought the Hell Knight had already been summoned. Even so, he could not move or run. If the ritual was interrupted, it would be ruined. Annoyed, Lloyd stepped back and readied his shovel. The man looked at him nervously as Lloyd raised it like he was about to swing a baseball bat. Lloyd swung and smashed the man directly in the face. After a moment, Lloyd frowned and looked at his shovel. The impact had bent it out of shape. The hooded man grinned as a drop of blood ran from his nose. A protection spell was active on him, a field that shielded him from harm. Lloyd swung again, this time releasing a mana blast. Even that failed. Though it knocked out a few teeth, the man remained standing in the same spot. He grinned at Lloyd, thinking it had barely scratched the barrier. Lloyd told him that he might be smiling, but it still seemed like he could feel pain despite the barrier. He considered what to do next. There was little time left to stop the ritual. He tried to absorb the mana from the man's brooch, but a backlash surged through it, sending a sharp shock through his hand. He rubbed it and looked at the man. Lloyd asked why he was standing so still. If he moved, would it disrupt the ritual? The man said nothing. Lloyd grinned and said he didn't need an answer. He would test the theory himself. Elsewhere, inside the town hall, people lay collapsed across the floor, weakened by the ritual. A man walked past them. One of the fallen reached out and begged for help. It was Cannavaro. He stopped and looked down at them with disdain, calling them pests before kicking the man in the face. He then turned toward the statue of the fallen angel standing at the centre of the hall and walked toward it. Cannavaro drew a dagger and sliced the tip of his finger. Grinning, he pressed the bloodied finger against the statue and asked it to become the gate for the Hell Knight. Back over at Lloyd, he was digging as the hooded man stood frozen with concern etched across his face. Lloyd carved away the earth around him, leaving the man balanced on a narrow pillar of dirt that looked ready to give way at any moment. Terror crept across the man's face as Lloyd stepped closer. Lloyd took a deep breath and blew toward him. The earth beneath the man collapsed instantly, and he dropped to the ground. The gem he wore began to glow as he screamed in protest. A blinding flash of light erupted from it, and when it faded, the man lay still, his life force seemingly torn from him. Lloyd knelt and examined the gem. That had been the result of movement. The spell had turned on its bearer. He looked toward Namaran's wall and saw it fracture along one side. Lloyd clenched his fist in celebration. Over at Cannavaro, he sensed a disturbance. Something had changed. The ritual was already too far along to halt, yet the mana feeding it felt insufficient. He chose to press on and began chanting in an unfamiliar language. Suddenly, someone shouted his name from behind. Cannavaro turned and saw Siluria approaching, demanding to know what he was doing. Surprise flickered across his face. She was moving freely. His gaze dropped to the necklace she wore, the gem set into it, catching the light. Perhaps that was the reason. An amulet of protection. He conjured a flame in his hand and hurled it toward her. Siluria raised her palm and halted the spell in midair. In one motion, she gathered the fire, amplified it, and reshaped it into a massive fireball. She sent it back at him. Shock flashed through Cannavaro as he summoned a defensive barrier, struggling to grasp how someone so young could wield such power. The spell struck, and a massive explosion tore through the hall. When the smoke settled, Cannavaro lay slumped against the statue. His barrier had failed. Siluria advanced toward him, demanding to know what he had been planning. Cannavaro began whispering a dark incantation. Then he called out for the Hell Knight to come forth. Cracks spread across the statue as dark energy seeped from within them. Siluria stepped back, asking what he had done. Cannavaro seized the moment of confusion and lunged at her, dagger in hand. Suddenly, Javier appeared, launching himself forward and slicing through Cannavaro's hand, the dagger falling with it. Javier struck again. Cannavaro hastily summoned a defensive barrier, trying to turn the blow aside, but the force was too great. The impact shattered the bones in his arm. The statue's glow intensified. Then a massive bolt of lightning tore down from the dark cloud above the building and struck it directly. The statue shattered, its fragments blasting outward in every direction. Siluria reacted instantly, summoning a spell that shielded the people from the flying debris. Cannavaro turned toward Javier and declared that it was over. They would all be reduced to ash by the hands of the Hell Knight. Behind him, something shifted within the cloud of dust. Heavy armour scraped as it moved, followed by the slow drag of a sword across the floor. Cannavaro looked back. There it stood, the Knight of Hell. Concern crept across Cannavaro's face. Where was its horse? His gaze dropped, and realization struck. The knight's legs were gone. The sudden loss of mana during the ritual had taken its toll. What he had summoned was incomplete, a partial manifestation of the Hell Knight. Even so, it was still powerful enough to face Javier. The knight turned its gaze toward Cannavaro and addressed him as the summoner, asking what it was he desired. Cannavaro pointed at Javier and ordered it to kill the silver-haired punk. The knight accepted the command and lunged at Javier, swinging its massive sword. Javier raised his guard and blocked. The weight behind the strike hit him immediately. Even with mana reinforcing his body, the force sent shock through his bones. The knight lunged again. Javier moved to block. It vanished. In an instant, it reappeared behind him. Javier had no time to react as the blade came down from above. A blast of wind slammed into the knight and knocking its strike off course. The knight turned towards Siluria, demanding how she dared interfere. It shifted its focus to her and advanced, raising its sword to strike. Just as the blow was about to fall, Javier unleashed an aura blast. The aura blast detonated against the knight, destroying its head and launching it across the hall in a thunderous crash. The knight dissolved into a heap of ash. As the knight turned to ash, Cannavaro cried out that it was impossible. Javier levelled his sword at him, then turned briefly to thank Siluria for her help and told her to get the people out of the building. Those with strength began helping the others to their feet, guiding them toward the exit as Javier told Cannavaro he would pay for his crimes. Cannavaro answered with a grin. He said Javier was a fool if he thought it was over. A being from hell could not be killed. Javier turned and looked behind him. The Hell Knight was already regenerating. Cannavaro burst into unhinged laughter, saying Javier could cut it down 100 times, and it would still rise again and again. The knight finished forming, its presence solidifying once more. It stepped forward toward Javier, then addressed him, saying it had known he was strong, but not this strong. It apologized for having thought so little of him. Gripping its sword in both hands, it spoke its name, Gialexius, commander of the First Corps in service to the Master of Hell. It told Javier to prepare for battle. It was time to see who was stronger. Javier raised his sword in response, giving his own name and declaring who he served. He said he would send the knight back to hell. For a brief moment, they faced one another. Then they charged. They moved faster than the naked eye could follow. The clash of steel filled the room as their swords struck again and again, their figures blurring as they traded blows at impossible speed. The knight warped from place to place, teleporting between strikes and making its attacks difficult to anticipate. Even so, it laughed, telling Javier it was impressed and that it was having fun. The knight began to overpower Javier as he defended with everything he had. He dodged strike after strike, but the strain was catching up to him. His movements slowed. He needed an opening, and fast. Javier hurled his aura dagger. The knight caught it effortlessly in its hand. Javier was already moving. He closed the distance and swung with all his strength. The knight vanished just before the blade could land. Javier turned, scanning for the next attack. He realized it too late. A surprise strike. He looked down. A sword pushed up through the floor as a portal tore open beneath him. The knight surged through it, driving the blade upward. Javier deflected the strike, the force knocking the sword from the knight's grasp. He told it to die and brought his blade down. The knight's hand snapped out, clamping around Javier's ankle. It hurled him through the air. Javier slammed into the ground hard enough to crack the floor. The knight seized him again and drove him down a second time. It loomed over him, saying it had been a pleasure to fight him, and that it would never forget his name. The knight retrieved its sword, raised it high above Javier, and prepared to impale him and end it. Just as the knight was about to deliver the final blow, a voice called out, calling it a bonehead. The knight glanced over its shoulder. Lloyd stood behind it, his shovel pressed against Cannavaro's neck. Lloyd asked what would happen if the summoner died. Would he be sent back to hell? Lloyd scowled at the Hell Knight, telling it had 3 seconds to let Javier go. He warned that if it didn't, Cannavaro would lose his head. Seeing Lloyd's expression, the Hell Knight thought his face looked like it had come straight from hell. There was no doubt in its mind that Lloyd would follow through. The knight asked if Lloyd was also a being from hell as well. A face like that could only come from the depths. Lloyd ignored him and began counting. The Hell Knight fired a mana blast instantly. Lloyd dodged, the attack narrowly missing him. Lloyd glanced over at Cannavaro. He had lost an arm. The knight said it made no difference. As long as Cannavaro lived, an arm meant nothing. It added that even if the summoner died, it would take 40 minutes for it to be sent back to hell. In that time, it said, it could decimate an entire city. Lloyd realised his plan had failed. Now what? He wondered. Just behind the Hell Knight, Javier lunged, aura sword in hand. The Hell Knight anticipated the attack. It swung its blade in a wide arc, striking Javier mid-lunge and sending him flying back. Lloyd called out, telling the Hell Knight to fight him instead, knowing Javier needed time to recover. When it ignored him, Lloyd called it a dirt bag and told it to look at him, trying to grab its attention. Struggling to his feet, an exhausted Javier thought that now Lloyd was here, they could now win this. Lloyd fired a mana blast to draw the knight's attention away from Javier. The Hell Knight raised an arm and deflected it as if it were nothing. It then turned and swung its sword toward the exhausted Javier. Lloyd lunged from behind, wrapping his arms around the knight's neck and locking his legs around its waist. The Hell Knight mocked him, calling him a fool and asking if he knew what happened when a human touched a being from hell. Dark mana would taint his heart, and he would die. Lloyd replied that it sounded frightening, but there was something he didn't know. He smirked and told it that he had purified plenty of dark mana before, and had built up a fair bit of resistance. Shock flickered through the Hell Knight as it wondered who this human even was. The system informed Lloyd that the mana he had absorbed from the Hell Knight had temporarily strengthened his mana heart. He was still no match for it, but it could no longer ignore him. Lloyd tightened his grip, locking the Hell Knight's arms in place. The knight struggled, calling Lloyd a pest as it tried to tear him free. Lloyd only squeezed tighter. With a surge of strength, the knight head-butted Lloyd with the back of its head, breaking Lloyd's hold for a brief moment, and twisted, pushing the sword behind it, trying to impale him. Lloyd dodged the strike, staying on the knight's back, then immediately wrapped his arms around it again. The Hell Knight struggled once more, but Lloyd refused to let go. He spoke quietly, asking if it had forgotten something. The knight looked ahead. Javier was already moving in, aura sword raised. The Hell Knight shouted in disbelief, demanding how he had recovered so quickly. It tried to block Javier's strike, but Lloyd tightened his grip, locking its arms down as the blow came in. Javier slashed the Hell Knight across the chest, and it roared in pain. He jumped back, then surged forward for another strike. The knight teleported into the air, narrowly avoiding the blow. Javier followed, launching himself upward after it. The Hell Knight realised it could not evade the next attack while Lloyd held its arms. Irritation crept into its voice as it demanded to know why Lloyd was still clinging to its back after teleporting. Javier moved in again. The knight teleported once more. Lloyd realised Javier could not keep this up forever. He had to do something. Suddenly, the system chimed in, requesting authorization to activate Article 37, Clause 1 of the messenger contract. Lloyd had no idea what that meant, but he approved it anyway. The system chimed again, informing Lloyd that it could offer direct advice just this once. It told him that he could defeat the Hell Knight if he sang. Lloyd asked what it was talking about. How could singing possibly defeat a being from hell? As Javier continued striking, and the Hell Knight kept teleporting to evade him, Lloyd made a decision and began to sing. Instantly, the Hell Knight screamed in pain, demanding to know what kind of curse Lloyd was chanting. Whatever it was, its mind felt like it was about to split apart. Lloyd kept singing. Through the agony, the Hell Knight realised it was just an ordinary song. That only made it worse. Was it possible for someone to sing this badly? It writhed in pain as the sound battered its senses, its ears feeling like they might burst at any moment. Still singing, Lloyd realised it was actually working. He called out to Javier to finish it. Javier couldn't move. The sound was too overwhelming, even for him. Lloyd had always known he couldn't sing. His parents had told him never to sing in public. Once, when his music teacher asked him to sing for the first time, the man had nearly thrown a piano at him after hearing it. Even in church, he had been accused of being a demon when he tried to sing with the choir. He had never imagined his voice could be used to banish a being from hell. Javier cupped his ears and wrapped them in mana, blocking out the sound. The Hell Knight collapsed to the floor, its teleportation failing as agony tore through its mind. Javier moved in, lunging forward with his aura sword as Lloyd released his hold on the now paralysed knight. He drove the blade through its chest and unleashed an aura blast, destroying the knight from the inside. A massive explosion erupted from the impact. When it faded, the room fell silent. Lloyd stepped toward Javier, but Javier stopped him, saying it wasn't over. He told Lloyd to look at the armour. Lloyd turned and saw energy gathering within it. The knight was regenerating. Javier stepped forward, sword ready, and told Lloyd to get behind him. A being from hell couldn't die. Lloyd grinned and asked if he wanted to bet on it.